Today's webinar is a follow-up to our previous webinar, which was showing how digital signatures can be used within the OpenText Live Link solution. By digital signatures here, we mean the CoSign digital signature solution. This webinar is going to be a follow-up to that, and it will be looking at how we can go on to use the CoSign digital signature solution within the SharePoint environment. So we've seen how we can use digital signatures and CoSign in Live Link OpenText. Today we'll be having a quick walkthrough, a very high-level summary on how we can do the same, but this time within a SharePoint scenario. If we kick things off by perhaps looking at our agenda, we're just going to have a quick level playing field of the types of digital signatures and the types of signatures available. So just to bring everybody up to speed on what we mean by signatures and what we mean by a digital signature. Then we're going to do a quick introduction to CoSign's approach to digital signatures and the CoSign platform, followed off by a short demo on how we can sign the document with a digital signature within SharePoint. So, digital signatures. If we look at the typical signatures before we move toward digital signatures, we can commonly put these into three different types of groups. So our first being a wet signature. So these are our what we call traditional signatures, so pen and paper signatures. Following on from that, we have an electronic signature. So again, these are a digital image of a handwritten signature. So liken these to similar to when we get our parcels from the parcel man and he presents you a pad and he says, please sign your signature, and you get a digital or electronic version of an image of your handwritten signature. And then finally we have what we now know as conventional digital signatures. If we go back and have a look at some limitations and perhaps some issues or concerns you may have with the traditional wet signature approach, so this is our pen and paper. The first one is obviously verification and identification. I mean, I can submit a document to a person and say, oh, this has been signed, for example, by my managing director. But unless that person has seen that signature before and has a way of verifying it, perhaps with a previous copy of my managing director's signature, there's very little verification and identification. Likewise, in terms of then trying to sign that particular document, if it is an electronic document, so in our case, kept within SharePoint, the user or person's forced to then have to print it out just so they can get it signed and then scan or perhaps recapture it so it goes back into their document management system. As you can see, it's quite an extended process. Saving a document into an electronic form only to print it back out so you can sign it and then put it back is not really the most efficient ways of doing things. If we then look at perhaps keeping it in its electronic format and then using an electronic signature, so again, this is our digital image of our handwritten signatures. Some of the limitations we can see here are integrity and security. So although now perhaps we can have some level of verification and identification, we're now suffering from integrity and security. So by integrity and security here, we're talking about, yes, this document has been signed, perhaps using a handwritten digitalized image, but how do I know it hasn't changed since it's been signed? So a good example here is a contract. So again, using a managing director as an example, may give a contract to an employee to sign, and the employee might then decide to use an electronic signature before handing it back to their managing director to sign. The managing director receives a copy of this document and has no way of seeing, unless he's personally himself created the contract or the document, know if any changes, unauthorized or unapproved changes have been made. So in terms of integrity, how do we know this is something which hasn't been played around with? Likewise, security. How can I confirm that this document and the signature are both secure, and I can confirm they're secure based on the integrity? And that brings us finally on to how electronic signatures went to evolve, and we have what we now know as a conventional digital signature. So where a digital signature tried to build on some of the limitations and concerns of an electric signature, is using digital certificates. So digital certificates are certificates you can assign to a person's signature. So what this does is it helps eliminate our issue with validation and perhaps verification and identification. So at least now, based on the certificate, I know that person's signature is their signature, and I know it's from them. So we've eliminated our verification and perhaps our identification side of things, but I've also introduced a new issue, which is obviously expense, because digital signatures have quite a bit of an overhead to help manage. You know, you have to have something in the back end that drives and looks after this technology. But most importantly, I still haven't addressed or resolved my issue with integrity. So yes, I have a solution now where I know the signature came from a particular person, and I can validate this, and I can verify this, but I cannot actually confirm if that document has changed since I last gave it to that person to sign or look at. Which of course brings us to our CoSign approach. So CoSign believe digital signature, or a proper digital signature, so we've gone away from conventional and now we're looking at an approach to a proper digital signature, is proof of not only identity, but it should be of intent and integrity. So identity here is being able to quickly identify who the person is. And intent is in a reason for why it was signed. So in our case, it could be approved, authorized. And then integrity being to make sure since said person signed it and authorized it and perhaps approved it, the document hasn't been changed. And these were based on compliance and security, which of course are always going to be your key drivers when you're looking at any signature solution. And when we talk about compliance and security, CoSign, being one of the leading industry movers in digital signature solutions, are someone who is very universally accepted in terms of being able to make their solutions meet regulatory requirements around the world. To name a few are some European ones. The CoSign approach is also designed to help enable the replacement of slow and expensive paper-based approval processes. So straight away, where I talked about earlier being forced to print a document off and then get it signed and then scan it back up, you've eliminated that paper-based approval process, or you've eliminated the reintroduction of that paper-based approval process, and you've kept your electronic documents within an electronic approval system, which of course will speed things up, help reduce costs, and keep everything fully digital. And then in terms of overall security, the CoSign central server, or the central store, or the brainchild as I call it, which is what manages all the sign-in technology, so this is in regards to our certificates and our sign-in keys, is kept in a piece of hardware which is secured and maintains and uses a lot of the toughest industry enhanced securities. With that said, of course, I'd love to dive in and give you a quick demo of how we can use the CoSign digital solution to sign documents within our SharePoint environment. On screen you have our out-of-the-box image fast demo style SharePoint system. This is SharePoint 2010. This is our landing page. We have our library called expenses. In our expenses document library, this is where our employees usually go on to submit their expenses so that they can then sign them to say that they're the one that submitted them and their expenses are correct, at which point they can later then be reviewed by somebody in the management team to approve them so someone in the accounts team can pay. Initially what you can see is across the top we have a new ribbon, and our new ribbon is CoSign. And as part of this new ribbon, if I select a document, my CoSign functionality become available. My first one is the ability to sign this particular selected document. The second is the ability to verify any documents, signatures on this particular document. And third, being able to review any signatures. So verifying here is in regards to our integrity. So that's saying basically, has this document changed since the signature has been applied? Has a new version been appended? Has a version been edited? So this is where we will check our integrity. Reviewing signatures will be, of course, where we check for identity and, of course, intent. So I can see it was signed by a particular person and why. In terms of then looking at our actual document library for our expenses, you can see as part of my particular setup, I have made use of some of the out-of-the-box CoSign columns, one being the last signature reason, another one being signature status, which of course tells me if the signatures are valid. So again, this is in regards to our integrity. So In our case, we have one that hasn't been signed, we have one that's valid. If perhaps this particular document had been edited after it had been signed, you'd see it say invalid. I can then go on to see who the last person to sign it was, how many signatures are present, and if all my signatures, again, in coincidence with this one, are valid. So not only can I see if one signature is valid, I can also have a quick view to see if all the signatures are valid. You may have that because you might have a situation where you have multiple signers. So you want to be able to say at any point where you have multiple signers, this document hasn't been changed in general. Outside of my CoSign ribbon above here, I also have, as part of my SharePoint Power menu, some CoSign additional menus added, with the first one being, again, to sign with CoSign, the second being to verify, and the third to review. So very similar to what we saw at the top ribbon, but the only difference is I can access it from my right-clicking SharePoint menu. For this particular example, I'm going to be signing my July expenses, and I've already uploaded my document to my SharePoint library. To give you an example of what my document looks like, I'm going to attempt to download the document down. I'm going to do this in read-only mode, just so I can view the document. And as you can see, it's an expense form. And as part of this expense form, I have two fields. I have one for the employee signature, and I have one for an approver to sign to say who this is authorized by. If I zoom in to give a much clearer view of this, you can see my two fields. These are what we call our signature fields. As you can see, as part of the Adobe integration, it's picked up that these are signature fields. And if I hover over each field, you can see that these are fields which I have dynamically added via CoSign. This is an example of some templates you can set up. So I may have a template expense form set up, which I then issue to my various employees to fill out. And because I've already locked in my signature fields, all they need to do is fill out the information in regards to their expenses. I can go on to actually highlight and unhighlight the fields using Adobe integration, and I can go on to perhaps show you in more detail what happens once that document has been signed. If I go back to my document library and I select the document, I then may choose to use a CoSign ribbon and click Sign with CoSign. What this will do is it will present me with my CoSign sign-in, or the beginning of my CoSign sign-in ceremony, as we like to refer to. From here, again, I can click on the document to view it, and I can also view the fields which need my signature, as you can see here on the right. Based on permissions, I may also be able to select which signature profile I want to sign. So in the example I showed you when I opened up the document, I showed you we had one field for the employee and one for the authorizer. Based on my current permissions, as I'm logged in, I can actually see both profiles. But in a more strict example or scenario, I would only be able to select the one, which would be employee. But because in this particular example, and I do have the permission to be an authorizer, I can also sign. I can then go on to select from a list of predefined reasons for signing. So here we can see I've got 4 set up: reviewed and approved, peer-reviewed, authorized, received and acknowledged. In this particular example, I also have the option to add a new reason. Again, something that can be turned on or off. In my case, I'm going to make use of this and explain, as part of the reason, I am the author, which was a reason not present in the list. And then I have the final option before signing to enter in my username and password. In this particular example, it's picked up who I am signed in as in SharePoint, but as part of the extended security functionality provided, I can actually choose to tell CoSign and SharePoint that I don't want to use my Windows network logon. I may decide to have a separate logon. Mine in this case is my email address, which is my image fast email address, and then I can then go on to enter my password. And at this point, I can finish off my signing process by hitting sign. So what this will then do is it will check my permissions against the CoSign central box, and will sign my document and update my values. So as you can see now, for my document, which is still marked as status new, for my last signature reason, I have the signature reason which I typed in as I am the author. You can see that my signature status is valid, as the document hasn't been edited since then. You can also see I'm the last signer, along with the signature status overall being marked as signed. In this particular example, I have a counter showing 1. The counter field is really good for those who may make use of workflows, so perhaps the standard SharePoint workflow or maybe a third-party workflow system, which you could also pass this particular value to. And then from within SharePoint, this could then move this particular document or send a notification to the second signer or authorizer who then needs to go on and sign theirs. From here, if I click and go back to my CoSign ribbon, I can then review the signature in this document. And as you can see, it says the signature is valid again, along with an advisory saying that this particular document has not had its content changed since it was last signed. So signed content was not changed. You can see who it was signed by with my name being able to be clicked on. So if my username was part of my network login, so in this case administrator, it would then send me to my details. And below I can expand to see any additional information about what was used. So in this particular case, I can see the time and date. I can also see the email address logged against that sign-in profile and the field which I filled in. So at a high level, for somebody else who had to go on to sign as a second signature, so as the authorizer, he can use this option to quickly check if the employee was who signed it, see the intent. So this is identification or intent. And then, of course, I can see my integrity being a green tick to say it hasn't been modified. If we then go back to our library, using the OK button, if I then wanted to sign on or continue the process, perhaps I am now the authorizer, I have the option to sign with CoSign again. And similar to before, I can view the document. The only difference being I would sign as the authorizer. I could check my reason and say this time it's reviewed and approved. And as you can see, changing it to the authorizer in this particular example locks the available defined fields, because in this particular example, as the authorizer, there is no other option for you to select for a reason apart from you authorized it. I can go on to enter my username and password. So for the sake of this demo, I will be using the same details I used before, perhaps spelling my name correctly. I'm going to enter my password, hit sign, while the system verifies to check if I can sign as that profile and if my user credentials are correct. And what you will now see is, again, my document has been updated, the signature counter incremented by 1, and again, my signatures remaining as valid because I didn't change the content. If I use my CoSign ribbon, select my document, and review my signatures, you'll now see I have an additional signature profile detail at the bottom, which shows, at the top, which shows that as an authorizer, this document has been signed, and should I have any additional workflows, it would go over to our finance team, who would then authorize and sign off my expenses. So in a short, quick summary, this is a quick example of how you can use the CoSign digital solution to sign documents electronically within SharePoint. Thank you for joining us.